Superman is the best there is at what he does. That's debatable. I said he's the best there is at what he does, not what I do. Hey, bub, mind if we have a word?
Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Today, I'm taking a long overdue look at the DC Multiverse Blue and Gray Hush Batman. I'm also including a mini review of the gold label Dick Grayson Robin later in the video. Starting with the packaging, and we know what to expect. Our standard unchanging DC Multiverse Batman up front. On the side it just says Batman Hush. Honestly, this is what I was looking for with Jay Garrick. Barcode for those of you having a hard time finding him. And some gorgeous Jim Lee comic art on the back. For packaging, I'm giving Hush Batman 1 whole point. Moving on to presentation, and to the top of his scalp, Batman stands at 7 1/4, but to the top of his ears, he stands at just under 7 1/2. I was pretty outspokenly disappointed by the original black and gray release, so much so that I made my own custom. My biggest issues were the slack jaw, the elbows, and the lack of tread on the shoes. This figure has fixed most of those problems, but has also gone above and beyond. The sculpting and painting on the mouth and jaw are fantastic. We get a bit of his nostrils underneath, and I love the shading around the eyes. The proportions are really good too. Unlike a lot of McFarlane figures, it does feel like a human head could fit underneath that mask. And although I've never been crazy about it, true to form from the comic, he does have some indent for his ears, but luckily it doesn't draw too much attention to itself. Directly addressing problem area number 2, we can see that the forearms and elbows are great. Everything has been appropriately painted, but addressing problem area number 3, and they did not do anything about the shoes. For those who are curious about what I'm talking about, the tread on Batman's boots took center stage in a lot of shots. So much so that it was the main focus of the cover of the first issue. For McFarlane not to have included them, especially when other DC Multiverse Batman figures had no problem going above and beyond on the tread, was a little bit of a letdown. As is, the only newly sculpted piece for this edition of the figure is the head. Otherwise, Hush Batman shares most of the same basic body parts as the 3 Jokers. That said, there have been some improvements, specifically with regard to paint. On mine anyway, the torso is satin, the abs section is gloss, the diaper piece is a matte finish, the legs are satin, and then the shoulder is glossy, but the upper arm is satin. While a quick spray of some matte finish would fix the whole thing, here the blue and gray have been painted on, giving a much richer sense of depth. You can especially appreciate that when looking at the cape. It creates a really wonderful shadow effect. I also like the more subdued brownish yellow for the belt. Bringing out my custom, I love how the belt on the original Hush matched the belt on 3 Jokers Batman, but as a standalone figure, this feels just more natural and balanced. I hesitate to call any figure perfect, but I like this one a lot more than I expected. I like it so much that I really regret taking so long to review it. Even though this figure is mostly reused, the new head and especially paint job puts it above and beyond. I've never done this before, but for presentation, I'm giving this Batman 1 1/2 points. Moving on to posability, and of course this has the same articulation scheme as 3 Jokers and the original Hush figure. All of his head articulation is at the base of the neck. Because of this, he sadly cannot look up whatsoever, but he can really bury the chin. The tilt is unnatural but great, and of course all the way around. Moving down, he can raise his arm up this high. He should get forward and back with the rotator cuff, but on mine they just simply will not budge. If I were to venture a guess, I would say that they're probably painted in place. Fortunately, there's no trouble with the bicep swivel, same with the double jointed elbows, and the wrist ball, which is functional but seems a bit outdated compared to more recent releases. Shifting the torso, and Batman has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. He can arch back this far, which given the cape is good, but on his own he can only hunch forward this far. Of course, you could always take him apart and carve a deeper groove, but after having the license for over 3 years, McFarlane really needs to update this. Fortunately, Batman has no trouble with tilt or twist. Below the utility belt, and Batman has a typical McFarlane hips. They do a near 90-degree kick, but a perfect split. Very nice amount of twist in the hip, double jointed knees, toe articulation, and ankle balls that can swivel, hinge, and pivot. I'm always looking for more range in the diaphragm, and I'd be a liar if I said I didn't wish he had a traditional neck joint. Even so, for posability, I'm giving Hush Batman 1 one, whole point. Moving on to playability, and naturally Batman comes with a trading card and a figure stand, although it doesn't say anything about the Hush version. For a basic bio, you can pause here. He also comes with a pair of batarangs. He also comes with a pair of fists, which I'm honestly kinda conflicted about. On the one hand, they included his kryptonite ring from the comic, which is great. On the other hand, they also included all the extraneous ribbing from the Three Jokers version. Considering that his standard hands don't have that, it becomes kinda distracting when you swap them out, especially because they had to re-sculpt the hand for the ring. If you were gonna re-sculpt them anyway, why not just sculpt them smooth so they match the other hands? But as I am so fond of saying, playability is more than just accessories. It's also about how well your figure plays with others. Starting with some other McFarlane Batman, and I'm going to be focusing mainly on what I think are the major ones. Here we have Detective Comics 1000, Flashpoint, this of course is his father, Thomas Wayne, Rebirth, notice the huge size difference, Dark Detective, if you didn't see it, I recently reviewed the Joker version. Here we have The Dark Knight Returns, another sizable scaling difference. On that subject, here we have Page Punchers, here's Arkham City with his spindly little legs, and one of my favorite McFarlane Batmans, Arkham Knight. All that being said, I did want to take a moment to spotlight the Mafex version. If you want to see a review of this guy, or maybe even a versus between the two, sound off in the comments below. Moving over to some villains, and of course we have to have Hush himself, but the first real villain we encounter in the story is Killer Croc. I chose this DC Direct one because it's a lot closer to what we saw in the Hush comic. Another major player from the Hush comic is Ra's al Ghul. This is the Arkham City version. Catwoman, of course, is very central to the story as well. McFarlane hasn't given us a Hush version yet, but here we have the DC Designer Series Grey Capullo version and Arkham City. Of course, at the heart of the story is the Riddler, who's the mastermind of the scheme. Here we have DC Designer Series Grey Capullo and also Arkham City. While Riddler might be the arch nemesis of Hush, we can't have Batman without the Joker. Here's Arkham Asylum, Mortal Kombat 11, which I think looks great with this Batman, and my own custom kit bash combining the clown with Death of the Family. For a very important hero comparison, and here we have the Angry Laser Eyes Hush version of Superman. This of course comes from when he's under Poison Ivy's control, and sadly, this Batman's still a bit dull by comparison. For another Superman comparison, however, and here we have Action Comics 1000, and at the request of YouTube user Adrian, here's Hush Batman with Henry Cavill and Page Punchers. Moving over to the Bat Family and my favorite version of Robin, and here's a couple of Mattel versions of Tim Drake. Here we have DC Essentials and DC Multiverse versions of Nightwing, and a couple of McFarlane versions of Batgirl. I'm honestly pretty impressed with how well the blue and gray of Art of the Crime works with Hush Batman. Not long after the Hush story, Jason Todd returned from the grave in the form of Red Hood. Here are a couple of DC Multiverse versions of him, and then not long after that, Batman was introduced to his long-lost son, Damian. The small one is Mattel, and the tall one is DC Multiverse. Of course, there is one other Robin worth looking at, the gold label DC Multiverse Dick Grayson. The package says this is based on DC Rebirth, but the artwork clearly comes from All-Star Batman and Robin. As for the figure itself, it comes from Carrie Kelly. The only new parts are the scaly undies, this smug little head sculpt, and a bunch of new hands. There's a set of fists, a set of open, more gestury hands, a set of pointy hands, the right hand's pointing his index finger, and the left hand is pointing his thumb for when he needs to show a little leg on the side of the road. Lastly, he comes with these accessory holding hands. They are perfect for holding this bat robe, which I'm very excited is an actual string. Seeing McFarlane offer so many hand options is awesome, and I really hope it becomes more frequent. I'm not going to show off the posability of this figure, because I already did, but if you want to see it, I will link to it at the end of this one. For my only other classic Robins at this size, and here we have DC Direct and DC Universe Classics, but of course it's really all about this. It's wonderful to see them together, and probably the closest we'll get to a DC Multiverse version of All-Star Batman and Robin. For a relative scale comparison, here's Hush Batman with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man, and as always, here he is with Stealth Iron Man. Don't worry though, I'm sure you're curious about at least a couple of head swaps. First up, and here's the battle damage version. I don't really care for this. To my eye, the neck is too thick and the face is too stylized. That really becomes apparent when we look at it sideways. But this, on the other hand, I like way more than I expected. To me, this feels like the makings of a really good Rebirth Batman. Give it a proper cape and get rid of the wounds, and yeah, next up is Batman Year 2. this one's interesting. The facial structure is similar enough to the new figure that it does feel like it could be two versions of the same person. I don't know how many of you would want a long-eared version of the Hush Batman, but I imagine there are probably a lot of you who do want a short-eared version of this. I'm not a fan of the cloth cape, but I do think the head works. After that came the fan favorite Three Jokers. As much as I love Three Jokers Batman, I never loved the head. Between the texture and the smushed face and the lack of neck, it just never quite worked for me. This, on the other hand, make the head black, make the trunks black, and maybe even throw in this belt, and you'd really have something special. Lastly, here we have the black and gray Hush, which again I did modify. As much as I enjoyed what I did customizing this head, if this is what we had gotten to start with, I'd have had a lot less to complain about. Although I may have groused about the execution of a couple of them, I'm very happy that we got so many accessories with this Batman, and also this Robin. I do hope at some point we get a more teenage/young adult Dick Grayson, but until then, these two truly make for a dynamic duo. And that's to say nothing about just how ideal this Batman is for your display. For playability, I'm giving this Batman 1 whole point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. Depending on your retailer of choice, this Batman figure goes anywhere from $20 to $25, but looking online, I can't find him available anywhere. I'll always caution you against running to the overpriced aftermarket, but if you see him on shelves, don't hesitate to strike. This very well may be the best comic book Batman McFarlane has made so far. For price, I'm giving Batman 1 whole point for a grand total of 5.5 out of 5. I made this video because you guys voted for it. If you want to be able to vote on upcoming releases, make sure that you're subscribed. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.